right, let's dive into this. We're going deep on 1984 today, George Orwell's classic. The one that everyone always says is, like, scarily relevant.
Right, it really is. I mean, even just reading the source material for this deep dive, it's chilling how much it resonates.
Right. So, like, full disclosure, it's a dystopian novel,
Mm.
paints a pretty bleak picture of the future. But that's why we're here to unpack it, right? Figure out what makes it tick, why it still matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so first things first, gotta set the stage. 1984 was published in 1949. Think about it. Post-World War II, the Cold War is brewing. The world was, like, seriously on edge, right?
Definitely. I mean, you have these totalitarian regimes like Hitler's Germany, Stalin's Soviet Union, and people were terrified.
Exactly, and that's where Orwell comes in. Do you know his real name was Eric Arthur Blair? Yeah, wild, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, Orwell, he was super concerned about political justice, freedom. He'd seen the dangers of extremism firsthand.
And that really comes through in 1984. It's like he took those fears about totalitarianism and amplified them, created this, like, worst-case scenario.
A warning, almost. Okay, so the book is set in Oceania, one of 3 superstates that are, like, constantly at war with each other. The main character is Winston Smith. He's kind of an average guy just trying to navigate this incredibly oppressive society.
But here's the catch. Winston works at the Ministry of Truth, get this, where his job is to rewrite history.
Wait, so he's, like, literally changing the past to fit the party's agenda.
Totally. And he knows it's wrong. Deep down, he's like, this is messed up. So he starts keeping a diary, which is, like, super legal.
Oh, wow. So even just having your own thoughts, that's a crime.
Yeah. Thought crime, they call it. It's crazy.
That's wild. So he's writing in this diary, and then he meets Julia. She seems like she's totally on board with the party, but secretly, she hates it.
Right. Yeah, she's totally putting on an act. And they start this forbidden love affair, another act of rebellion.
It's like they're finding these little cracks in this oppressive system and trying to carve out a tiny bit of freedom for themselves.
Exactly. But it's Oceania, right? Big Brother is always watching.
Okay, I was just about to ask about Big Brother. What's the deal with him?
He's like the face of the party, this all-powerful, mysterious figurehead. Nobody knows if he's even real, but his image is everywhere. It's creepy.
I bet. So Winston and Julia, they're sneaking around, but they know they can't keep it up forever.
No, they get caught, betrayed by someone they thought they could trust, and then the thought police come in.
Oh, man. I knew that was coming, but it still makes my stomach drop. Okay, so what happens?
They get separated, thrown into prison, and the torture begins.
Oh, gosh, not just physical, right?
Right. They use psychological manipulation, drugs, everything they can to break them down completely. And their goal isn't just to punish them, it's to completely rewire their minds.
To force them to love Big Brother.
Exactly. It's terrifying. And the messed up thing is, it works.
What? So Winston, he gives in.
He does. In the end, he betrays Julia and declares his love for Big Brother. It's one of the most chilling endings in literature. It shows you how powerful totalitarian regimes can be, how they can twist your mind until you don't even recognize yourself anymore. Really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, talk about a downer ending. But, it's not just the plot that makes 1984 so powerful. It's like Orwell was really trying to make a point. He was showing us what could happen if we let things go too far.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest themes, I think, is totalitarianism. The party, they control everything, literally everything. What people eat, what they think, what they believe.
It's like there's no room for individuality at all.
Nope. You're either with the party or you're against them.
Yeah.
And if you're against them, even just in your thoughts, you're in big trouble. Remember thought crime.
Right, right. Which brings us to the whole surveillance thing.
Yeah.
The telescreens everywhere you go. It's like always being watched, never being alone.
It's creepy. And it's relevant. I mean, think about it. We've got cameras everywhere now. Our phones track our every move. It's like, are we that far off from Oceania?
Kind of makes you think, huh? And then there's the whole idea of truth being manipulated.
Yeah.
I mean, in 1984, the party literally rewrites history. They make up facts. It's like the ultimate fake news.
The Ministry of Truth is such a brilliant concept, isn't it? Because it highlights how easily we can be manipulated, how propaganda works.
Totally. It's like you start to question everything you see and hear.
Mm.
Which I guess is kind of Orwell's point, right?
I think so. He wants us to be critical thinkers, to question authority, to not just accept what we're told.
Yeah. And then there's the whole individuality versus conformity thing. Winston, he's just trying to hold on to his own thoughts, his own beliefs, but the pressure to conform is just, like, crushing.
Right, and that's something I think everyone can relate to on some level, the pressure to fit in, to go along with the crowd. But in 1984, it's taken to the extreme. There's no room for dissent, no room for being different.
You're either with them or against them, like you said. Okay, so what about newspeak? I always found that concept kind of fascinating.
It's brilliant, isn't it? This idea that by controlling language, you can control thought. They're literally trying to eliminate words that could express dissent or critical thinking.
So if you can't even think the words, can you even have the thought? That's scary.
It is, and it makes you think about how powerful language really is, how it shapes the way we see the world, the way we understand things.
Okay, so we've talked about totalitarianism, surveillance, manipulation of truth, conformity. It's a lot.
It is, but there's more.
Oh boy, hit me with it.
We've got psychological control. I mean, the party, they don't just want to control your actions, they want to control your mind.
Right, right. Like with Room 101, that's some seriously messed up stuff.
Yeah, it's the ultimate fear factory. They use torture, both physical and psychological, to break people down, to force them to conform.
To love Big Brother.
Exactly. And it's terrifying because it shows how vulnerable we all are, how easily we can be manipulated if someone knows how to push our buttons.
So what's the antidote? Is there like a way to fight back against this kind of psychological manipulation?
Well, I think awareness is key. Recognizing that these tactics exist, understanding how they work.
So like knowing your enemy.
Yeah, in a way. Because once you know how they're trying to manipulate you, you can start to build up defenses.
Makes sense. Okay, but let's be real. 1984 is not exactly a feel-good story. So like, why is it so popular? Why are we still talking about it all these years later?
Because it's more than just a story. It's a warning. It's a reflection of our own fears, our own anxieties about the future. And it's full of these incredibly powerful symbols.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about those symbols.
Yeah.
Because Orwell was a master at that stuff, like Big Brother, obviously. He's more than just a character, right?
Right. He represents the all-seeing eye, the ever-present surveillance state. And it's a symbol that's even more relevant today than it was back then.
With all the cameras and technology and like the internet knowing everything about us.
Exactly. And then there are the telescreens. Again, not just TVs. They represent the invasion of privacy, the way technology can be used to monitor and control us.
It's like they're always watching, always listening. Creepy.
And then there's Room 101, the ultimate symbol of fear and psychological manipulation. What's so brilliant about it is that Orwell never tells us what's inside Winston's Room 101.
So it's different for everyone.
It's our own personal hell, whatever that may be. And that makes it even more terrifying.
Okay, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. But there are other symbols too, right? Smaller ones that add to the overall feeling of like dread and hopelessness.
Yeah, like the paperweight Winston buys from the antique shop. It's a symbol of beauty, of the past, of things that the party is trying to erase.
And it gets destroyed, right? Like crushed under a boot.
Yeah, which symbolizes the fragility of individuality, the way the party crushes anything that threatens its control.
And then there's Winston's diary, another symbol of his rebellion, his attempt to hold on to his own thoughts and feelings.
Right. It's a symbol of hope, even though we know it ultimately doesn't save him. And Julia's red sash, the one she wears as a member of the Junior Anti-Sex League. It's interesting because it's a symbol that gets turned on its head.
Like it starts out representing conformity, but then she uses it as a sign of rebellion.
Exactly. It shows how even the party's symbols can be subverted, can be used to express resistance. And then there are the proles, the working class. They're kept ignorant and distracted, but they also represent a potential source of hope.
Like they're the ones who could actually overthrow the party if they ever woke up to what was happening.
That's the question, isn't it? Are they a symbol of hope or a symbol of apathy? Orwell leaves it open-ended, which makes it even more thought-provoking.
It's like he's saying, it's up to you to decide. What do you think? Is there hope?
And then there's O'Brien, the party member who betrays Winston. He's such a complex character, so manipulative and cunning.
He really creeps me out. It's like you never know what he's really thinking.
Exactly. And he represents the seductive nature of power, the way it can corrupt even those who seem intelligent and insightful. He's a reminder to be wary of those in positions of power, to not be blinded by their charisma or their promises. It's a lesson that's relevant in any era, right?
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked about the plot, the characters, the symbols, but there's like this whole other level to 1984 that I think we need to explore. The philosophical and psychological stuff, our sources really dive into this, and it gets pretty deep, like existentialism, Freudian psychology, Marxism.
It's amazing how this one book can be interpreted in so many different ways, isn't it? It's like everyone finds something different in it.
Right. Okay, so existentialism, I'll be honest, that's one I've always struggled with. It's kind of like bleak, right? Life is meaningless, we're all going to die, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, it can be a bit heavy, but I think in the context of 1984, it actually makes a lot of sense. Think about Winston. He's fighting for his individuality, his freedom, in this world that's completely devoid of meaning. The party has stripped everything away, right? There's no religion, no art, no beauty, just power and control.
So, like, in a way, Winston is trying to create his own meaning in this meaningless world.
Exactly. And that's what existentialism is all about. It's about recognizing that life doesn't have inherent meaning, but we have the power to choose our own meaning, to create our own values, even in the face of, like, overwhelming oppression.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So even though Winston ultimately fails, his rebellion, his attempt to find love and truth, that's like an existential act.
I think so. It's about saying, I will not be defined by the party. I will choose my own path, even if it leads to destruction.
Okay, that's pretty powerful. So what about the Freudian stuff? Because, I mean, the party's methods are pretty messed up, right? The torture, the manipulation.
Yeah, it's definitely dark. But it's also really insightful because Orwell seems to understand how the human mind works, how our deepest fears and desires can be used against us. Think about Room 101. It's based on each individual's worst nightmare, right? It's like tapping into our primal
So
fears.
yeah, it's like psychological warfare.
Exactly. And Freud was all about the subconscious, the way our hidden desires and anxieties can influence our behavior. So the party is basically using Freudian techniques to manipulate people, to control them.
That's kind of creepy, but also, like, brilliant.
It is. It shows how deeply Orwell understood human psychology. And it makes you think, like, how vulnerable are we to this kind of manipulation?
I mean, even today, with advertising and, like, social media and all that, it's all about playing on our fears and desires.
Totally. So it's like 1984 is still relevant, even in that sense.
Okay, so existentialism, Freudian psychology. What about Marxism? Because I know some people see 1984 as, like, a critique of communism.
Yeah, it's a complex issue. I mean, Orwell himself was a socialist, but he was also very critical of totalitarian regimes, regardless of their ideology. So I think you can read 1984 as a critique of any system that concentrates power in the hands of a few and exploits the many.
So it's not just about communism. It's about any form of oppression.
Right. And from a Marxist perspective, you could argue that the party represents the ruling class, the ones who control the means of production, while the proles represent the working class, the ones who are exploited.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Like, the party is all about maintaining its power no matter what.
Exactly. And they use propaganda, surveillance, violence, whatever it takes to keep the proles down. So I think there's definitely a Marxist critique to be made there.
It's like Orwell is showing us how power corrupts, no matter what ideology you subscribe to.
That's a good way to put it. Okay, so we've got existentialism, Freudian psychology, Marxism, any other mind-blowing interpretations we need to cover?
Well, our sources also mention postmodernism, but I'll be honest, that one's kind of over my head.
Yeah, postmodernism can be tricky. But basically, it's about this idea that truth is relative, that there's no one objective reality. And in 1984, the party controls the narrative, right? They decide what's true, and they can change it whenever they want.
So, like, 2 + 2 = 5 if the party says so.
Exactly. And that's a very postmodern concept. It's about the way power can be used to shape our understanding of reality.
It's like we can't even trust our own senses because the party can manipulate them.
Right. And that's a pretty scary thought, especially in today's world. With all the fake news and misinformation out there, it's like, how do we know what to believe anymore?
Right. It's all about, like, critical thinking.
Yeah.
Right. Questioning everything.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I think the main takeaway from 1984 and all these different interpretations is that we need to be aware, we need to be vigilant, we need to fight for our freedom, our individuality, our right to think for ourselves.
Yeah, because if we're not careful, we could end up in a world where 2 + 2 really does equal 5.
Exactly. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into George Orwell's 1984. It's been a wild ride, right?
It has. Definitely a lot to think about. But that's what we do here, right? We dive deep, we explore, we challenge ourselves.
And hopefully we learned something along the way.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, keep those minds sharp, keep questioning, and keep fighting the good fight. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.